All right, guys, so I thought we'd do something a little bit more lighthearted this morning. I'm recording this on a Saturday morning, so just a chill weekend video, and thought we could watch two of the most infamous examples of anti drug propaganda in American history. So we're going to start with the trailer for the notorious film Reefer Madness. Now, this film was originally commissioned in 1936 by a church group that wanted a film mainly intended for parents to sort of bring to life for them the dangers of marijuana. So the full film, which is available on YouTube, is over an hour long. To be fair to these actors and to the producers, we're talking 1936, so we're like not long after the end of the silent film era. So film, in this kind of sense, was very much in its infancy, but it is nonetheless one of the most like horrifyingly cringy pieces of media of all time, in my opinion, and it was a flop even by the standards of the time and for its intended purpose. What's really cool, and what I didn't know until I like researched a little bit for this video, was that it was such a flop that it actually almost went 360 degrees and ended up back at the beginning where it had some artistic potential, because in 1938 it was bought by this guy who realized that he could recut the footage and turn it into what they call like a grindhouse or an exploitation film. So these films were shown in these, they were called exploitation houses or exploitation theaters, which featured films that were viewed as too violent or too deviant or otherwise unsuitable for mass audiences. So it actually had sort of a second life. Once he purchased it again in 1938 and recut it and reissued it. So we're going to watch, as I said, the trailer for this film, which is just over a minute long, and I'm going to try so hard not to interrupt too often, but it really is like almost too good to be true. So all right, so without further ado, let me get us set up
These
here.
high school boys and
All right, we should be good to go.
girls are having a hop at the local soda fountain. Innocently they dance. Innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell. In this film, you will see the ease.
I do not understand why the people who are, whatever they're doing, like harvesting the weed or trimming the weed, are wearing suits, even by the standards of the era, but that's, I guess, neither here nor there.
Ease with which this vicious plant can be grown in your neighbor's yard, rolled into harmless-looking cigarettes, hidden in an innocent shoe or watch case.
If you want a good smoke, try one of these.
You will meet Bill, who once took pride in his strong will as he takes the first step toward enslavement.
Of course, if you're afraid.
I love that we have like the Abrahamic temptress here. You know, we're rehashing Adam and Eve in this 1936 film about weed.
Smoking
All right, I'll shut up after this, I promise. But that series of facial expressions that Bill just made, I think one of the most genuinely scary parts of this film, and I did view the entire Reefer Madness video. It was originally called Tell Your Children, but when it was remarketed, it was called Reefer Madness. And here, let me just go back so you can see that again. I hope it's good enough resolution for you to see his face clearly, but if you had told me that this was one of those Christian propaganda films about like avoiding self-abuse or struggling with same-sex attraction problems, like would 100% believe that for my guy Bill here. So here we go.
Smoking the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide, and the ultimate end of the marijuana addict. Hopeless insanity.
I actually unironically love the piano in this.
See this this important bill now, before it is too late.
All right, so we talked about the initial run in 1936. It was a flop, and then the full film, which again was recast as Reefer Madness, was remarketed in 1938. And then in the 70s, when there were marijuana legalization advocates who were starting to, bring the case for legalizing weed to the American public, they brought this film to life for a third time. There were a lot of stoned viewing parties, and in some ways it's regarded as the first film that was so bad that it was actually worth watching. It got that kind of cult following, and it sort of started some legitimate artistic dialogue around unintentional satire and whether there could be value in art that was so bad that, again, it went almost all the way around the circle, and it became something that could be critically analyzed, and as a serious or a worthwhile enterprise. So really kind of cool story behind that one. Now, the second one that we're going to watch is probably the most famous anti-drug commercial, or let's just say propaganda piece of all time. It is the "This Is Your Brain on Drugs" video. This one was commissioned by a nonprofit that still exists. So the original name of this nonprofit was Partnership for a Drug-Free America. It is now called the Partnership to End Addiction. I love that they're getting more realistic with the name. They're like, moving away from the U.S. as even a place where possibly we could have no drug use, and just moving away from addiction now. So I guess that's sort of like a more reasonable goal, right? But yeah, so this one was originally released in 1987. It was re-released in seriously reformatted in 97, 2016, and 2017. So when it was first released again in 87, this was like smack dab in the middle of the Nancy Reagan Just Say No era. That whole campaign had started in 1984, and they were looking for something really short, just punchy, to the point, intended for a wide range of ages and audience demographics. And so this is what they landed upon. I'm going to play it now for you guys without comment.
Is there anyone out there who still isn't clear about what doing drugs does? Okay, last time. This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
All right, so it's a very clear image. Again, a really short, like to the point illustration of what they're trying to say, which is that drugs scramble your brain, which is in some ways, for some drugs, over an extended enough period of time, completely a fair point, right? But I was reading through the comments, the top comments on the YouTube clip of this video, and someone was saying, like, can I get brain on drugs on toast? And someone else was pointing out that, like, as a marketing ploy, they really chose the wrong set of associations, because particularly in America, that sound of eggs frying, that sound of, breakfast being cooked in the kitchen, it's a very homey feel. It conjures a lot of positive associations for almost any American of any generation. It is not this set of things that you really want to condition as associated with drug use if you're trying to condition people away from that, right? And what was really interesting is that Forbes actually did an analysis of this, and they found that during the heyday of the original run of the commercial, this Partnership for a Drug-Free America had achieved a single brand advertising clout during the Reagan era that was comparable to that of McDonald's. So this was phenomenally successful in the sense of getting the message that they had arrived at out there. But the problem was that the message itself wasn't effective. And we see this like in every era of American anti-drug propaganda, I should say. We see that like there's this anti-science bent, and that we have missed so many good opportunities to educate people about the way that their minds and bodies work, and about the true dangers of substance use, most of which are very insidious and manifest in the long term. This commercial was sort sort of a forerunner of, if you are a millennial like me, you might remember those commercials. I think they were targeted, they were mainly about ecstasy and the incarnations that I saw them in, but they showed very famous slides of brain tissue with holes in it. And this wasn't an example, it wasn't an example of an outright lie. I believe that there were a set of experiments in which mice, if I remember correctly, were administered really high doses of either methamphetamine or MDMA, which we call ecstasy, and they did end up with these characteristic macroscopic lesions in their central nervous systems. But that is an excellent example of an animal study with incredibly high toxic doses of a single chemical that were then extrapolated outward falsely to humans, to other drugs. And again, we just totally missed the mark in terms of educating young people about the dangers of substance use. And again, they had this incredible recognition from this commercial. It was a really clear set of images and associations. It just wasn't the right one to accomplish the purpose that they were going for. And once again, it became a joke, you know, like by this point, smoking weed was fairly mainstream. I mean, everyone in America, especially suburban and urban America, well, I shouldn't even say that because rural America has a huge prescription problem too. They were taking heavy duty downers and uppers like amphetamines. This was the era of the Quaaludes and the barbiturates. So like there was heavy, hard drug use in America, but it was prescription drug use. And because Big Pharma was so incredibly, even already by then, these companies were so incredibly powerful and they were so effective at lobbying that there was no talk of how, okay, maybe high dose amphetamines cause holes in central nervous system tissue, and guess what, you could be getting that toxic substance from your doctor. In fact, that was probably where you were getting it from. And okay, you can die from drug withdrawal, and again, that's the barbiturate or the benzo that your doctor is prescribing you. In that same mistake in anti-drug education, the failure to acknowledge that most addiction in America comes, or at least starts, from prescription sources, that was hugely underpinning the opioid epidemic that, again, since the turn of the millennium, has caused over 1 million American deaths by overdose alone. So that's more than all of the soldiers that we've lost in all of the wars since the end of the Revolutionary War combined. So what you see in this is, again, underneath it is this false dichotomy of the dangers of street drugs versus the dangers of prescription drugs, and that second part of the dichotomy is never discussed, and we totally miss the mark. In my opinion, anti-drug or responsible substance education should always be an opportunity to teach about biochemistry and neurochemistry and how the mind and the body are related, and how you can back yourself, especially with downer drugs, you can back yourself into these biochemical corners where it takes time, it often takes years, but at the end of that process, it's so incredibly hard to get out of because you're not going to feel normal or anything better than normal without the substance that you've had on board regularly for so long. So I don't want to prattle on for too long today. Again, I just want to make a short, kind of lighthearted video, but thank you for joining me. You know, I was thinking that the sort of final grievous irony of this kind of early anti-drug propaganda in the US was that we have sort of, through decades of ineffective war on drugs policy, we have sort of taken this histrionic, sensationalist propaganda from, again, the 30s through the 80s. And now I think of things like, xylazine, trank. I think of all the people getting amputations right now from that. I think of things like bath salts, which really did cause psychosis, in some cases permanent, in my experience, in a very short period of time. So we've kind of taken the sensationalist propaganda through bad policy, we've made some of it come true. It's actually kind of like a nightmare when you think about it that way. And thinking globally, I think of things like crocodile, which again came about in Russia because of the prohibition of legal opioids that aren't prescription. So it's the final, like, really sick irony of all of this, that we have sort of fueled the creation of more and more potent and dangerous substances by banning more balanced, organic ones for the past 100 years. And it has, as I often say, been the most catastrophic global policy failure, one of the greatest global policy failures in human history. This is a hot take. I think it's up there with slavery and colonialism. It's certainly tied in with those power structures, and it has just been devastating. You know, just over 100 years ago, you could go down to the corner store, you could get and laudanum, so you could get opium and alcohol. You could get tinctures or other formulations of cocaine and cannabis and morphine and heroin, and there was almost no regulation around that. And addiction was a social problem. If you go back to the sermons of the time, you have pastors and ministers exhorting against the evils of alcohol and opium. So it's not like we didn't have a substance abuse issue then, but it was manageable. You could live a normal life because it was affordable, and most importantly, you could go to a doctor and be honest about it. So yeah, it's just, I guess that's the thing that strikes me, is that we have sort of created a dystopia through decades and decades of doubling down on the worst kind of ineffective policy in the US. So if you enjoyed this video, please drop a comment and share your thoughts with me. Otherwise, I again appreciate you guys joining me, and I will catch you next time.